Hello, I would like to know if you can listen to me, if the sound is okay. Good. We will wait for, we normally should start in about 2 minutes, but to give the chance for more people to join, we will start in about 10 minutes or so. Is that okay? Hello, everybody. I think it's about time we start. I would like you to please fill up the form that I put on Slack. I don't know if you saw it. I will also put it here into the comment section of YouTube. Just bear with me a second. I'd like to know if you can all listen to me loud and clear because I don't have sound for myself, obviously. So there's obviously a delay, and I'd just like to know if you can listen to me. Um, can you listen to me? All right, so we can get started then. 1 sec, so I'm bringing my notes. Bring up my notes. All right, so hello everybody. My name is Ioannis Anifantakis. I graduated from this scholarship on the Android Nano degree track, the advanced track, on June 6th. And today it's my pleasure and honor to provide any possible help to you guys to help you proceed with your Android Nano degree so you can get closer to the finish line on time. I'm really excited because those of you uh, who are here on Capstone 1 stage at the moment, you're so really close to the finish line. Trust me, you have plenty of time to complete both your Capstone 1 and Capstone 2 projects if you are here at this stage. And well, then just graduate and hop to the brag day channel of Slack and let everybody know of your achievement. Today, before any questions, I would like to provide some information so that we can all get started and make sure that we are on the same page. So I will ask you to stay with me here on the live stream. So I say a few things that might be useful regarding the approach to Capstone 1 project, but generally to Capstone as total. So there will be things that we will discuss about Capstone 2. Okay, then we will take any questions, and hopefully I will answer whatever I can. So, sec. All right. Um, Capstone Project 1 and 2 together is actually a free subject project that you will uh, propose, which is your part 1, and once accepted, you will implement, which is the part 2. So actually, Capstone Project is there are 2 stages, stage 1 and stage 2. Okay, here we will discuss about stage 1, but we will get more in. We will talk about stage 2 as well. Um, Now, I'd like, because I will be mostly speaking at this time, and I will look into notes and stuff. In case there are some questions, you should tell other students to just wait a little bit until I finish what I say, in case I don't see those questions, so that they are asked later, okay? Um, well, now, given that Capstone 1 project is a technical documentation, you need to provide for your project proposal, while Capstone 2 is the actual code you need to develop based on your accepted Capstone 1 proposal. You might think that there is no much code involved, and it's okay. It's an easy thing. And to some extent it is, but it most definitely requires coding skills to a large extent. And that is because you cannot get technical if you're unable to understand the coding pitfalls. Be aware of the libraries you want to use and their limitations, and then imagine, visualize the actual code before you write it. And now, then and only then will you be able to provide a structured and solid project proposal. Now, that is what the Capstone 1 is about. It's about providing a structured and solid Android technical documentation. Capstone 1 is not building a custom rubric like you're used from your previous projects. So you're not making a rubric here. You're making a solid industry level technical documentation. So Capstone 1 is the complete industry level project documentation you need to define from scratch. This should be what you need to give to your developers, and make sure that by this and this document alone, you will have enough information to describe the implementation steps required. So your developers in your imaginary corporation would be able to actually take this and turn it into an app. So now, if you go into your classroom, you will see the documentation that you have for your project, okay? And in there you will see, let me get it here in front of my eyes, the description they give, which is one sec to get it here. Okay, as it says, to become a proficient Android developer, you need to design apps and make plans for how to implement them. This will involve choices such as how you will store data, how you will display data to a user, and what functionality to include in an app. What will I learn? Through this project, you will demonstrate the ability to communicate an app idea formally using app description, UI flow mocks, and a list of required tasks that you will complete to build the app. So the Capstone project will give you the experience you need to own the full development of an app. This first stage replicates the design and planning experience that proficient Android developers are expected to demonstrate. So this is the official description of Capstone 1. So now, how we start? Where we start? First, you need to come up with an idea. I bet you had 1,000 ideas about some cool apps you might wanted to build. But now that you might be here ready to implement your actual project, your head might be empty. That is usually the case. You're not alone, so don't worry. If you cannot get an idea fast, ask your friends. Play a little bit with Google Play, with some cool apps that you possibly like and find that are into your level of implementation, in your level of abilities. Or start with one of the suggested apps from the Capstone 1 instructions page. Now, a good thing to know, a big hint here, is that if you have an outdated app on Google Play, which you might want to rewrite, this is possible. You should have no problems rewriting an existing app. And I'm having here a link which I will paste. Okay. Here I pasted a link in here in the YouTube comments that will take you into the Udacity forums, where you can see that you can freely use an existing app if you have one. Now, second, you might need to start thinking about implementing your own idea. Okay. Once you have the idea ready, you will normally go into the rubric about Capstone 1. And once you go into the rubric of Capstone 1, you will probably try to just see what's there and start building. That's not the case. You need to go through the rubric of both Capstone 1 and Capstone 2. And the reason is simple. Your project is broken into two stages. The first being the project description, as we said earlier, and the second being the project development. That bond is also reflected as the last requirement of Capstone 1. I will paste here the last rubric requirement into YouTube comments, which says, app design specification demonstrates implementing all features required for Project 7, which is Capstone 2 build. All right, so that truly means that you should read both rubrics before starting developing. So listen to that, otherwise you will possibly fail the last rubric of the last requirement of first rubric. So now let's look at this a bit further. Consider that there are some requirements from Capstone 2 that are simply not described in the technical requirements of Capstone 1 deliverable. For example, on Capstone 2, it's clearly written that one of the rubric requirements is to have a widget built for your app. However, on Capstone 1 rubric, there is no description to include information regarding the usage of your widget, but only to include it in your mocks if you have one, which gives you the false impression of the widget being optional. So please do read Rubric 2 so you see what things you need to include in your project before making Capstone 1 project. It will both help you construct Capstone 1 correctly, and it will also be vital in order to pass your Capstone 1 at the first place. So where do we start? How do we put everything together? Well, you need to begin by opening the template for your Capstone 1 project. And this will navigate you on your completion. I will paste you here Capstone 1 template. Now, from there, we will go to one by one every part of the requirements of the template together with the requirements of the rubrics. So let's get started. First things first, let's go into combine the rubrics. 1 second to get my screen sharing ready here. So, okay, now we will combine the rubric and the template all at the same time, so that I will try to share my screen here. Okay, now 1 second to share the screen, see how it's done. Screen share. All right. So here we have the Capstone 1 design and the template open at the same time. So let's see how we can implement this thing. Firstly, I'd like to tell you that there might be some things that you might consider not non-relevant. Like, for example, here you will see on the specification that app is solely written in the Java programming language. And you might think that, but this is a technical document, there is no code involved. So what is this? Is this just something they forgot to remove from previous projects? Well, it turns up that's not the case. It turns up that this must be in one of your statements on your technical document. So you will need to have something like statement. The app, uh, this app is written solely in the Java programming language. So at the bottom of your document, you need to have this line copied and pasted. But also, you will need to have this line copied and pasted, which says app utilizes stable release versions of all libraries, Gradle, and on Android Studio. You don't need to state which versions of the libraries you will use. You don't need to say that I'm going to use, for example, Picasso 252. You just need to say that I will not utilize beta versions of any libraries. So that's it. You just copy and paste the first and the second line here on the meet specifications, and actually you will meet that specification. Then you will need to have a proposal that contains an overview description. So here you will need to explain what your application will do. Then you will need to have a description about the intended user, so who this application refers to. So let's say I will give you an example of my capstone. There is no plagiarism involved here, thankfully, because everybody's doing a different subject. So I will give a little bit of insight from my stuff. What I did, for example, was a news application. Um, for those who would ask if you can resurrect an old application, yes, my application was the complete rewrite of an old and abandoned one. So yes, you can do that. I did that. So what I did on my proposal, for the first part here, I had a description like the application will load categories, for example, of articles. It will have the live streaming of our TV station involved. It will have this, that, and that. Uh, Things like it will have day and night themes for day and night reading. It will contain these options and these preferences. So you will describe on the first part here what your app will do. Then on the second part, who is the intended user? For example, the application that I did was a Greek application that was taking sources from a Greek news agency. So my description here is that this application refers to the average Greek-speaking reader, and mostly people located in this specific region because it was a regional news vendor. So you just need to say who is the average person that would make use of your app. That's the second. That's your second line here. Now the third, the mocks. The mocks is something that many people have been asking me questions about. The mock could be really anything. It could be, I've seen people who have passed Capstone 1 who drew something on a piece of paper and they took a photo of it, and it was fine. I saw people who used some online mock-up tools like the Ninja Mockup or the Fluid UI, and it was fine. And I will put 1 second, I will give you here on the live stream some links about the mockups. 1 second, because I'm having too many windows open here. So I can't find it. I'm losing myself. So we have the fluid UI gives a more kind of realistic UI if you want to create your mockups. I have put it here on the notes on the chat, and also you have the Ninja mockup, which is a more sketchy solution, so it will look more like a sketch. So that's if you want to do it online. You can do it using Photoshop. You can do it using just pen and paper. You can do it using one of the available solutions like the ones that I gave you online. They both have some free options, so you can make your first mockup. But both of them, both Fluid UI and Ninja Mocha, have also paid options. So if you want to add things like logos and stuff and make it a little bit more fancy, you will need to pay. But for the basic UI mockup, you can do it for free with those two. Other than that, you can even take screenshots of other apps that you like and modify them on Photoshop so that you build something that is like your thing. For example, one thing that I did was I liked very much for my news app CNN's widget. So actually, I took a screenshot of CNN's widget. I changed the logo and a few other things, and I said that this will be how my widget will look like, and this was absolutely fine. So as long as you find ways to create something that will reflect your future app, this is just fine. So let's continue. That's about the mockups. Okay. Now, the proposal declares the app's primary features. So the basic stuff that your app will do and will be able to do is one of the things that you need to provide. Well, actually, this part, the app's primary features, together with the overview description, they might confuse you a bit, but they're a bit different. The overview description is generally, I'm going to have a news app that will provide news for the region of Crete. Okay, but the features will be like, this app will download feeds from this feed source, and it will enable the user to play the live streams and blah 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 and so on. Now, so this goes a little bit deeper. The app's primary features. The proposal outlines any key constraints, such as persistence, UX corner cases, libraries use. App clearly outlines how database will be implemented. So now here we get into the more, let's say, technical part of your description. Here you start being more, let's say, you give more details. So what we mean by UX corner cases, we will see this when we get into the template, but know that you need to get specific about your structure, how the app will work, not just what app you're going to build, but how it's going to be built. So this is this line, And we will look at it at more detail when we get into the template so that we see each part separately. Now, another thing on our rubric is proposal describes plan to implement the main features via a set of well-structured technical tasks. So this, these two lines are, actually they refer to, let's say, the same thing, but about the technical details that we will look into later. And the UI mocks depict interaction stories that adhere the core quality guidelines. So what we mean by this, by the mock, is, for example, that you will, if you have a back button, it will not be a custom back button, but it will be the default back button that Android provides. So don't depict into your UI things that will override stuff from the core app quality guidelines that you have been following so far. Okay, and the app design specification demonstrates implementing all features for Capstone 7, for Project 7, that's Capstone 2. So this line is the line that we have been discussing earlier, that all these that you've read here makes you going to read also the rubric about Capstone 2 before doing Capstone 1. So the last line tells you read Capstone 2 as well and put into your rubric of put into your Capstone 1 the features described in rubric 2 as well. So so this is how it goes so far. I would like, before I continue into the template and into Capstone 2 rubric, to get any questions so far, please. So I will answer any questions here on YouTube right now for the up to now, and then we will continue further. Is there anything somebody would like to ask? Any questions so far? Or am I talking to myself? Is anybody here? There are no questions? Okay, I got a question. Thankfully, somebody's here. Okay, well, the key store thing is on P7, but we will cover it here as well. If you want a quick, let's say, hint about that, because I imagine that we will have this as a question about the key store, is let me find it. One second, because I have this saved on one bookmark, and I will give it to you right now. Okay, I found it. Now, all right, so the above link is for Dennis' question. Okay. Dennis, the link I provided contains all. Now, is there any other questions? All right, so let's continue to the template. And now, additionally, I should just come here. So let's look at this now. All right. So the first thing is the description part. Okay. So here you could say, for example, let's take as an example the application that I did, which would be like that I will build an application that will provide articles for provided by a Greek news agency called blah blah blah. This is the rewrite of an existing app, and this application will manage day and night themes and stuff like that. You will provide the basic description what this app will be about. Okay, so once you finish that, you go from here into the intended user, which is here, intended user. So as I said earlier, you will say, for example, as I had in my app, that this app is intended for the average Greek news reader, giving him the ability to explore local news about the region of Crete and so on. So this could be the intended user, the local user in the region of Crete that speaks Greek and that can actually read Greek and is in the region of Crete. So this is the intended user for my app. Okay. Then you will continue into the features. The features here, which is here, you will, as you see, the feature says that the list of features your app will have. For example, saves information, text, pictures, other features. So, for example, in my case, I would say that my app will display news articles via downloaded feeds. Would allow you to save your favorite articles for later reading. Would utilize day and night theming. Would allow text-to-speech for the visually impaired people, would target phones and tablets, would follow material design principles, would have preferences to change various things like the text size or the available categories and so on. So all these things would be a kind of bullet that you would have for your app. So that thing is what goes into your features. Then you come into the interface mocks. As I said earlier, for the interface mocks, you have few options like the Ninja mock that is also depicted here. You can use Photoshop. You can use Fluid UI, as I said. You can even use a piece of paper and your camera and simply send a picture of your drawing. You can do whatever you really like, as long as it describes the actual project, each screen of your project. So this is what the user interface mock will be about. And also don't forget, other than your actual applications content, to include content for your widgets. And also know that the widgets are compulsory because they are required in Capstone 2. In Capstone 1, they go into a parenthesis, giving you just the impression that they are optional, but they are not. Okay, so this about about the mocks. Other than that, now I see one question that we had. If we need to have free and paid flavors. No, you don't need to have paid flavors. One flavor is enough. Let's continue. Now, the key considerations. All right, let's go into the key considerations. How will the app handle data persistence? Describe how your app will handle data. For example, will you build a content provider or use Firebase real-time database, and so on. So in here, about the this kind of, let's say, considerations, you can put something very simple. For example, I just get 2 lines here. For me, one line was that application will store favorites articles via content provider in SQLite. Okay, and that was the first line. And then I had another line saying that shared preferences will exist for, for standard preferences. So my data persistence would be favorite articles stored in SQLite and shared preferences for some settings. And these 2 lines would be enough for the data persistence. So it's not something really complex here. And then you could get into other things like describe any edge or corner cases in the UX. Now, this might sound like, what does this mean? Well, actually, it's not something very complex. Here is like describing how you transition between parts of your application. So, for example, let's say what I had, for example, would be things like moving back from detail activity will return back to the main activity. Moving back from the video stream will terminate the video stream and get you back to the main activity. If the radio stream is playing, it will continue to play, but with an ongoing notification that will allow easy access to radio when you enable it. So you describe what happens in actions. For example, as I said, radio station. When you initiate your radio station, you will have a notification, so that even if you leave the application, through that notification, you can click on the notifications icon and get back to the stream so that you stop it, for example. When you go into the detail of the news article and you want to go back, the main activity will show up. So this is how you transition between things that you have showed in your mock. So this is not something really hard. So the edge corner cases in the UX is actually describe how you transition from one part of your application to another. So that's mostly it. It's not something hard. Okay. Now, describe any libraries you'll be using. Share your reasoning for including them. All right, here you don't have to do anything hard. You need to, but you need to be careful when you put things here, okay? You will not be very tight to the things you've put. I mean, there might be a case where something that you have put cannot be applied because there's something better. So if you put a library here that you didn't actually use, it's okay. It's just don't have everything being, you know, completely different to what you will do on project, on stage 2 of the project. So things that you can put here is actually one of the libraries that you will definitely have here is, for example, Google's Compatibility Library, to ensure that there is compatibility with previous Android versions, okay? Then are you going to have pictures and stuff? Well, if you do, put Picasso or Glide. For example, when I started this Capstone 1, I wasn't sure if I would finally end up using Picasso or Glide for displaying pictures on my actual implementation. So what I had here, for example, was Picasso and in a parenthesis or Glide. Okay, so I said that I might be use one of these two libraries to perform images here. Okay, then you will think, for example, I was downloading stuff, so one good choice of libraries to add was Retrofit as well. But as I also told you, I was having live streams of TV and radio, so Exoplayer would be also a good library to put here. Now, are you going to use Google Play libraries? Well then, obviously, because it's one of the requirements of the Capstone 2, you should put them here as well. So start thinking about your project and think about what you would use in order to do it. And put most of the libraries that you can think of. You don't need to put everything here because obviously something might come up later or something might not actually fit at the first place when you start implementing. But try to have the most of the things you can put here. And trust me, there are too many things that you can have here. So this should be no issue to you. Okay? Now, describe how you will implement Google Play services or other external services. Now, for this part here, one thing you would be, for example, let's take as an example something that most people put in their apps, and that's AdMob. Okay, so you could say, for example, that AdMob banners would appear at the end of each article, for example. So you will say then about other libraries that you will utilize, how you will utilize, how you visualize them to exist. Okay. Now let's go into the next steps, which is the required tasks. All right, let's look at the required tasks. This is the section where you can take the main features of your app declared above and break them down into tangible technical tasks that you can complete one at a time until you have a finished app. All right, so here we will break your tasks into, you will break your actual implementation into doable tasks. So you will say, for example, that firstly I will do this, secondly I will do that, thirdly I will do that, in order to complete your project. I will tell you so that you don't need to go in panic here, that sometimes this might not be the case. Many of the tasks that I put here turned out to have different order at the end as I was implementing my own project. So this is not definitely the best thing, but so you should try to give the tasks that you would implement in order to end up to doing your project. But if you somehow jeopardize this order and have one task being implemented before the other, it doesn't matter, because at the end you will give uh, a, complete the project to the reviewer. You won't give each task separately. So what we mean by tasks here, for example, one task would be to implement the UI for each activity and fragment. And then it will be like create the master activity, then create the layout, the XML layout for displaying the article, and so on. Then you could have a third task, which would be, let's say, populate the recycler view with the fetched articles. You could have then like a task for to handle the live video and audio streams. Then you could have another task to handle Firebase support for the application. So try to think of it as building blocks. Okay, so here you will have what each task will do once the previous one would be completed. So that's what this thing is about. So follow these examples as they are given here in the imaginary task that you have with the green letters. And then at the end, all you need is some statements, as I said for the Rubik. For example, you can have a statement saying at the bottom of the page that the app will be solely written in the Java programming language. The app will utilize stable versions of all libraries, Gradle and Android Studio. You need to have another statement that all the libraries being used together with Gradle Android Studio versions will belong to stable versions and not beta versions. You can have another statement saying that there will be no hard-coded strings. All strings, colors, etc. will be stored in the equivalent resource XML files. For example, strings XML or color XML, and so on. And this statement is required about the hard-coded strings because it's part of the Rubik 2, which is for the Capstone 2, which we will look at a moment because we'll go through Capstone 2 Rubik as well in order to satisfy Rubik 1. Now, before I continue into Rubik 2, I would like you to give me more questions now, and then we will hop into Capstone 2 Rubik in any moment. Any questions? moving to Capstone 2, right? Sorry guys for this silence. I'm just looking at the chat for those who haven't been looking at it and just wondering why I'm not speaking. All right, regarding Thomas Smith's question, um, as I said, I wanted to go into the rubric for the Capstone 2, which is the utilization of your actual proposal. And I will describe everything that refers to Rubik 2 as well there. So do not worry about that. I will cover it because, as we said, the last part of the stages 1 Rubik is that we cover everything that is required on Rubik 2 as well in the documentation. So in order to do so, we need to understand what the Rubik 2 includes as well. So yes, Rubik 2 is also part of today's talk. So do not worry, we'll go through everything on Rubik 2 as well. The thing is, if you have any questions for the Rubik 1 so far and the template. Okay, guys, 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, and we will continue with Rubik 2, and then we will get questions for all Rubiks. Thank you so much, and I hope that I wasn't very boring until now. All right, I'm back. Uh, um, is everybody here as well? All right, okay. Um, okay. Um, Now, we are here with the Capstone 2, and I would like to briefly go through the Capstone 2 Rubik requirements. Okay. Um, those three we don't need to look. It's a standard requirements for the general project guidelines being written in Java, not utilizing any Canary and beta versions of any library or Android Studio and stuff, and we go into the more specific parts. Okay. Now, for your capstone, app will need to integrate a third-party library. Okay, this is as easy as, we said on Capstone 1 that we need to have some parts that will utilize, you will need to put what third-party libraries you will have, like Glide or uh, Picasso or anything that you need, that you use, any non-Google library. So I believe that you will have this should be very easy. You will be able to at least have two, three, four of these with ease. Now, app validates all input servers and users. If data does not exist or is in the wrong format, the app logs the fact and does not crash. So don't get confused by this. This means that your app shouldn't just crash. For example, if you request a feed and the feed never arrives, your app shouldn't crash. If the feed comes but it's not as expected, you should be able to cope with uh, those problems. One such case was in the baking app, where the feed was having an intentional mistake. So as you manage to deal with that, you should be able to deal with your stuff. So just your app shouldn't crash. Okay, that's what it says here. Now, the app includes support accessibility. This includes content descriptions, navigation using D-pad, if applicable, and non-audio versions of audio cues. Now, regarding this, I have, let me find it into Udacity. I think I put it here. Or I put into Android. I think I put into Android. Where is it? Put here, I think. One sec. Well, why I can't find it? But no, one sec. About the D-pad. About the D-pad. Just one sec. Let me find it. I never find what I want. All right. About D-pad, I will tell you that. Okay. About D-pad. In D-pad, you will have. No, it's not here. Just bear with me a second here. Okay, I cannot just find it right now. I will put it later into the into notes. So because I don't want to steal more of your time here, just looking about things and you just there on the screen. How the D-pad works. The D-pad is actually, if you saw on older devices that they had, you know, like buttons up, down, left, right, or some to put things like a gamepad into your actual uh, into your actual application. If you have a D-pad, which is like a keypad, you would go up, down, left, right, and so on. So for people with accessibility problems who would just navigate using Navigator like that, your app should be compatible. Okay, so in order to do that, you can get documentation about defining into your XML layout what is the next focusable object. So, like defining as if you had the tab key on your computer, but also what is the next up, next down, next left, next right. I will give you a small hint here so that you don't get really anxious about it, about how you're going to deal with this. I'm going to tell you that you don't need to do anything with that. If you just leave it as it is and you don't mess with it, you should normally be okay. So with a D-pad, even though you can make your changes, it's better not to mess with it. It's better not to define what's the next focusable up, next focusable down, next focusable left, or next focusable right. So if you don't do that, Android does it fine anyway. So mostly here, what you need to do is define descriptions to everything. Like for every icon that we have, it should have a content description. So because for accessibility, with the D-pad, you would hear you would hear the descriptions of the items that you are navigating to. Okay, so that's what the D-pad will do. Firstly, announce the things that you navigate to if you are, like, let's say, visually impaired, and allow you to navigate left, right, top, and so on, like a joystick. So one thing is to get into the documentation and define what's the next focusable item, uh, or you can just leave it like that, which works fine anyway, and simply define the descriptions. Okay, so your app should at least have descriptions and work with a D-pad. Now, and that's all there is to this part. Now, here, as it says, app keeps all strings in a strings XML file and enables right to left layout, switching on all layouts. So here, this is one of the things that you need to put into your Capstone 1 statements. So since we say that the Capstone 1 will take into consideration everything that exists on Capstone 2, you should have on your statements that my application will include support for accessibility, allowing navigation with D-pad, and include content descriptions. And my app will keep all strings into strings XML and all colors into color XML and so on. So you need to put statements about those two into your Capstone 1 description, the statements that I told you about. Just mention that this will happen, and you are covered. Now, app provides a widget. Okay, so on your Capstone 2, as we said, you will need to utilize the mock that you designed about your widget. And now let's go into the Google Play services. Your app will need to implement 2 or more Google services. Okay, the Google service integrations can be part of the Google Play services or Firebase. Well, Firebase, firstly, because I saw a question, I think can be considered as a third-party library, but don't take my word about it, okay? Now, for Firebase, you can implement many things that could be very useful. For example, into my implementation in Firebase, I had FCM, Firebase Cloud Messaging, so I could send notifications to my application, and I also included something else that is also easy to implement, and it's called Firebase Remote Configuration. With the remote configuration, you can set up some changes to your actual application without the need to go through the update from the Google Play Store. For example, as I said, my application runs TV stream and radio streams. Now, if for any reason I change the vendor of my radio stream, so I feed my radio stream from another source, I would normally have to put a new application, an update for my application for the people to upgrade through the Google Play in order to get the change. That would give a dead radio stream to those who haven't updated. But if you have, for example, the radio stream, as I have it into the remote configuration, it is actually something like controlling the some of the user preferences remotely. So with the remote configuration, if I change the streaming source for my radio, I will simply put this change into the cloud, and everybody will magically feed from the new radio station. So this is one example, for instance, from what I did. So it's something that you can easily use. It's very easy. It's actually a kind of, as I said, remote shared preference. Look at it as a remote shared preference, that you can set remotely. So it's a very easy and good thing to do, and it is one library less for you if you utilize that. So one less headache, an easy thing to implement. Okay, so bear in mind about the Firebase's remote config. That's one thing. FCM, cloud messaging, could be another thing, because, for example, you might want it to give some notifications from time to time to your application. So if you implement FCM, Firebase Cloud Messaging, and remote config, you can easily go through that part and have these to utilize, and you will be just fine. Another thing is that a very easy implementation for your application is AdMob. It's very easy to put a banner into the bottom of one of your pages, for example, and have it have utilized one library for that, and this will be the AdMob library. So that's another very easy way to satisfy this part of the Rubik. So you are not forced into using a specific service. You can use any two services that you like. Okay, I already talked about three. There are more services here, like analytics, maps, identity, and analytics is also a very easy service to implement. You just put it once, and you can at specific points of your code make a tracking for a specific action. Like, let's say that I track whenever somebody clicks into one of my categories. So I track which categories people prefer, or which articles they prefer when they click to them. So you will just put like an anchor to track one specific action. So also the analytics is very, very, very easy, and the AdMob is very, very easy. So those two are two very easy implementations, so that you satisfy this specification. But also Firebase is a very good thing about FCM and remote config. So this is very easy to be done with. Now, if we go into the material design part, you will notice that okay, your app should obviously your thing should extend from the app compat, and that you should use toolbars, and there should be some easy transitions. Let's forget about the transitions for a moment and go on to the first two. Those first two things are very easy to implement, because by default, when you create an app from Android Studio, those things are there for you just by creating a new app. Okay, so the first two ones should be no problem. Now, about the third one, which is the transitions, if you go into the classroom, there is a lesson about transitions, which is very easy. You can just make one transition when you go from one activity to another. So that means that your application should contain at least two activities. Otherwise, you won't have transitions. So a single activity project would normally fail this this part of the requirements. The other thing is shared element transitions, where you can have one icon from the first activity being transitioned to the second activity, which is also very nice looking and very easy to implement. So you should have at least two activities into your project. Now, building. App builds from a clean repository checkout with no additional configuration. That means that if you send me your application, I should be able to build it. That doesn't necessarily include running it. And what I mean that you might have some API keys that you cannot pass publicly if you submit it via GitHub. Of course, you can just pass them easily if you submit directly through a zip file, which is no problem to you. But in any case, if you are using some API keys that should not be shared on a public repository, your app will still build. When it runs, it might give you a message that says, unfortunately, I cannot run any further because you haven't provided me the keys, but it will build. So do not be confused about the API keys here. Even if your app needs to provide API keys privately to your reviewer, this doesn't stop you from this requirement, which is just that it should build, okay? Now, another thing is that the app builds and deploys with the install release Gradle task. For those of you who don't know about it, I can take a screenshot. I should open my Android Studio and take a screenshot so that I show you where it is. Just 1 second, please, if you may, so that I do it. So just a sec, bear with me, 1 second. Okay, I already got it here, taking a screenshot and put on Paint. Or actually, okay, so we have the install release. I have it here. All right. Okay. All right. So I don't know if you can see it. Your application should build by clicking this button, the install release from your Gradle tasks. All right. Now, in order to do that, you should define your keys about the key store. I had a question about the key store before, and this was found into the discussions part of the forums, and you have an official answer here about implementing that, and I am putting it online. I'm pasting here the all right. Uh, Oops, I think I pasted the wrong. No, don't look at it. Don't look at it. Uh, don't look at it. Okay, that's the correct one. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Ignore the previous link. It was a mistake. Uh, now, so here about the key store, in order to do that, you need to prepare your key store. I will not go into too many details, but Nico here, who is a forum mentor, has a walkthrough about everything that you need to do. So if you simply follow those two uh, guidelines here, you will complete this part and have your project build and install release. Okay, so now, so look at the my last link into YouTube. Now, so this will allow the sign-in configuration and the key store passwords to be made so that you can deploy with an install release. Okay. All right. And now let's get to the last part where I think there was also a question about it. Okay. Here is the last part, which says that the app stores locally either by implementing a content provider or using Firebase real-time database or using Room. No third-party frameworks for persistence libraries may be used. Okay, so we either have one of the three options: content providers with SQLite or Firebase real-time database, or using Room instead of content providers. Um, Now, this is a kind of choice that we have. For example, at my implementation, which I started it before the Room nodes were released, I was storing articles for later reading using content providers and SQLite. So I followed this approach for my project. Now, I was then challenged by this part, which says that I must at least implement one of the three here. I implemented those two, uh, which were a bit easier, let's say, at some point. And I implemented them in a very easy way while I was storing and retrieving my articles. So what I did, I was using an intent service to store the articles, so I wouldn't block any thread. An intent service would do its job, and when it was finishing, it would store the next one if it could queue. Of course, we're talking about milliseconds here, so queues are no are out of discussion. But for the sake of the Rubik, I was storing using an intent service my articles, and then I made a class that extended a sync task, okay, uh, from which I was retrieving the um, the articles whenever I wanted to retrieve them. So that way, I made two classes: one for storing the articles and one for reading the stored articles. So I utilized it in that way, those two. I don't know if that covers the question. If it doesn't, I'm open to more about it. Now, uh, if content provider is used, the app uses a loader to move its data to its views. Now, for that, what I did, um, I was having at my articles, I was having a loader whenever I was reading, a list of articles. Now, one of the features that I had in my application was that I was saving the 20 most recent articles for later reading anyway, other than the ones I was bookmarking. So while I was bringing the latest articles, I was as I was having them with a loader, I was using a content provider to save those specific 20 articles. So that's how I approach this part. Now, uh, the last part I didn't touch because my system was implemented without the use of live data, view model, or any or room. So that is when it comes to the Rubik 2. One very big hint that I will give you now that allowed my last project to be reviewed in a very, very fast time was that I was having descriptions of this part, which is the hardest to follow, to my reviewer. So I was directing my reviewer saying that I do this in order to store articles in this class, and I am doing this to retrieve articles in the other class. And I am using at this line of this file, I am doing the loader and content provider thing. So by providing all this information to the reviewer, this allowed the reviewer to have a much faster understanding of how my code worked in relation to the Rubik, and that gave me a very, very fast review for my project. So a very big hint is to have a document to follow your projects, especially since this is a free subject project and the reviewer can lose hours and hours to correct it and review it. I suggest that you have a file, a document to follow your project and make your reviewer's life easier, and you get a much faster response. Um, Now, I think I am done with a brief description about Rubik 2, and I am coming back to the questions so that now that we have a more, let's say, complete idea about how to approach some things, uh, we can see we are now on the same page about asking questions. And now I see the first question that says if we need to use one of those, prefer using RxJava for background tasks. Also, I use Retrofit. Well, the thing is that I used Retrofit too for retrieving my articles. But you need to have at least one part of your code that will uh, follow the rubric, at least partially, at least at some part of your code. And if you have one part of your code that was made specifically so that it follows um, this kind of requirements, you can have it on your final document that will follow your second submission, that is your Capstone 2, so that you let the reviewer know that I satisfy this part of the rubric at this location. Now, if I go into my drive, you will see that Capstone 2, here where I had my directions to the reviewer, I was having things to note, how I use Firebase Firebase cloud messaging, um, uh, various things. Here I was having a rubric approach. So I was saying that, for example, uh, for my project, I was the intent service. I'm using the intent service so that the application stores the category items in SQLite. I use this file here, the storage retrieval task Java, so that I satisfy the async task, I satisfy the intent service. Also, as I said in article list activity Java at line 452, the async task loader fetches the favorites, and then I use a content provider query to retrieve the bookmarked item. So I say that this part which says if content provider is used, the app uses loader to move data to its views. And I say yes, that part I satisfied here. That part I satisfied like this. That part I satisfied like that. So all this together, uh, which is this thing here, which is the hardest thing for the reviewer to do, he can do it with your documentation. Um, is there any other questions? Um, I will be available for 2 more hours at Slack, so even if you don't have any immediate questions here, I will be able to answer any question for another 2 hours at Slack. Um, I hope that we covered into this our talk mostly how to approach Capstone One in terms of completeness of your project, and also Capstone 2 as a Rubik approach, so that you have in your mind uh, what needs to be done in Rubik 2. I want to say that um, again, put to pay too much attention into the requirements of Capstone 2, because based on that you will need to design uh, all your technical documentation regarding Capstone 1. And also, as we also at Capstone 1, the last requirement is that it should uh, implement all the features required for uh, uh, Capstone 2. So I hope the Capstone 2 Rubik wasn't very boring for you. Um, that's it. That's all, folks. I want to thank you very much for your time. And we will continue for any questions in Slack from this time and on. Thanks a lot, and I hope it wasn't boring. Bye.